Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here today. Silly to give a Dharma talk when there's a baby here. We could all just turn and watch the baby for an hour. But it's not the baby's turn yet, I suppose. Anyway, thank you all for coming and making the trip out to Green Gulch Farm. See many familiar faces. Those of you who I don't know, my name is Jiryu. I'm the abiding abbot here at Green Gulch. So today I wanted to pick up and turn and chew with you a line from Suzuki Roshi that has been on my mind. So I'll just jump in with this line. Suzuki Roshi, of course, our Japanese founder of San Francisco Zen Center, of which Green Gulch is a part. He says, if you do not have the spirit of repeating it forever, if your everyday life is not based on this kind of spirit of repeating it forever, you cannot cope with the problems you will have day after day. So I often feel in encountering Suzuki Roshi like he's looking right at me. And in this line, he is looking right at me. It catches me, of course, because I long to know how to cope with the problems that I have and will have day after day. The small problems and the great problems, the personal problems and the community problems. Eesh, should have known. I did know, and still for some reason I said yes. So the societal problems, deep, painful, intractable, devastating societal problems, the global problems. How will we cope? How do we cope? Maybe in part, that question brings all of us to the Buddha Dharma or to a meditation hall. How will we cope? What is the path of dealing with the suffering that we have and will have day after day? It's also, I think, catches me for the bluntness of Suzuki Roshi, that somehow he encourages us by saying something very discouraging. The problems you will have day after day. Doesn't your heart sink a little bit? Like, come on, Suzuki Roshi. I'm on the Buddha path. The problems are going to end. You told me in the last chapter. You mean, maybe you mean if my problems will continue day after day. But still, somehow it's reassuring to just hear, no, you will have problems day after day. There's something encouraging about that, maybe because now it's dawning on me that these problems really are unceasing. Maybe it's just that I'm old enough to now to realize that there's no end to the problems. It's time for me to learn to be with each problem rather than waiting for them to run out or figuring out where I could be that didn't have them or that had better ones at least. So we have this Han, the wooden board that sounds calling us to Zazen, and it says, great is the matter of life and death. Being alive is is an amazingly big deal for us. And life is passing. It's fleeting. It's gone. Even as you say the words, they're gone. So don't waste time. So I reflect on my life, my present, and my past, and I notice this wasting of waiting for the problems to be over. And imagining how great and peaceful and bright everything will be when the problems finally run out. This sense that I'm about to get it. I'm about to find peace and joy and energy and practice. I'm about to touch this actual fact of being alive, to know it completely in my bones, to be amazed, to realize the Buddha nature, to fully be in my body in a minute. There's just one or two little problems, or big problems, just something that needs to get out of the way, and I'm almost there. I can taste it. So that's a waste of time. Long time goes by waiting for the path to clear. So of course, our way, the Buddha way, the Zen path, is to meet moment after moment our problems as our life, as our Buddha nature, as our wisdom and compassion. Every single problem, again and again, over and over. So if you do not have the spirit of repeating it forever, if your everyday life is not based on this kind of spirit of repeating it forever, you cannot cope with the problems you will have day after day. So in this context of this line and this talk, he's talking about a practice which I've often shared. Many of you have heard me share, or maybe read it yourself. This practice of clearing our mind, he feels that and teaches that it's very helpful to clear our mind of everything that we don't need. And we don't need anything in our mind. So this practice, he says, just clear the table. Just clear the table completely. There's some leftover wrappings and tin cans and stuff. Just clear. They were good while you were using them, but just clear the table. Clear the mind. Not because anything that was in it was bad, but because our practice is to share the feeling of being alive with the mountains and trees and people and rocks and walls and tiles, to share the feeling we have for being alive with everything, and to share in the feeling that everything is extending to us. I have not stopped talking about this practice pretty much since the moment I heard it, because it's so beautiful to me to share this feeling of being alive with everything, just as our body, as our being, and then to share in what's being offered to us. Which is kind of the same thing. We're sharing this feeling of being alive with everything, moment after moment. But it's hard to appreciate because our mind is so cluttered. This is Suzuki Roshi's teaching. It's fine that the mind is cluttered. It's just if we want to do this practice of sharing this feeling of being alive, noticing that we are alive, sharing that feeling and sharing in the feeling, it helps to have the clear mind. And his point is you can't just clear your mind once. Like yesterday, I cleared my mind. It was great. That doesn't, it's moment after moment after moment. Uh, we must have this spirit of continuing forever, clearing and clearing and clearing in order to share in and share in this moment as it keeps changing. So anyway, that's the practice that he's talking about, and it's definitely worth practicing forever. But more broadly, I think this statement, this kind of statement, applies to any of the practices that we might do, any of our spiritual or ethical or life practices, awareness practices. Now that you have this practice, whatever it is, are you up for doing it forever, repeating it, continuing it forever? That's the spirit that he's pointing out. In another place, he says, he seems to like this phrase a little bit. He says, when we think about how to cope with the problems we have in our everyday life, we realize how important it is to practice Zazen. Usually when I think about how to cope with the problems in my life, I just get tired and discouraged. But he says, if we really think about, geez, how will I cope with these problems? We'll remember that Zazen, some practice is necessary. If we're not really facing our problem, it maybe seems like some practice isn't so necessary. But when we really have this question, how will I get through? How will I cope? Then we draw on something strong and deep, like Zazen. And I love this about the Buddha Dharma, this simplicity, straightforwardness, that we have a problem, and wouldn't it be good to get some support in coping with that problem? So we have all of these great sutras about, these cosmic Buddhas that we could one day become, manifesting, becoming these bright Buddha beings, manifesting wisdom and compassion, realizing the great earth and the vast sky as just this very human body, attaining the way, realizing enlightenment. And, or in the meantime, as uh, just coping with our problems. Maybe we would settle for that. How to cope with our problems. So Buddhism is here to help us with that. First, by not scolding us for having a problem. So the Buddha Dharma, the Buddhist teaching, comforts and reassures us in our problem. Of course you have a problem. That's why Suzuki Roshi can say you will have a problem, because he knows the Buddha's teaching is you have a problem and you will have a problem. We have a problem. So when you have the problem, the Buddha says, yeah, I told you you would have a problem. The Buddha does not say, geez, what's with you? How come you have a problem? You must not be practicing this thing I taught you. That is not what the Buddha is saying. The Buddha is saying, yeah, you have a problem. That's right. There is no way of being alive that doesn't have a problem. That's what he's been teaching from the start. There's something that doesn't have a problem, we can talk about some other time, which is called non-existence. So anyway, that's, if there's no condition of being alive that doesn't have a problem in it. So it's not a problem that we have a problem. It's not something to feel bad about or to scold ourselves about. It's not some sign that we're practicing incorrectly. And of course, fundamentally, the cause of this problem is our loyalty to the illusion of separation from everything around us and each other. and our constant flailing in the waves of wanting something we don't have and not wanting something we do have. That's how life always is. So I think the problem, you know, I strongly encourage students of Buddhism to not think that this logic runs backwards. So we hear that there's a path and then there's liberation, which is fine and good. But then we put it backwards and we say, the fact that I'm suffering is confirming that I'm not on the path. So it's not really, I think, the right question to ask, what am I doing wrong? I ask myself this all the time, and people talk to me about their practice, ask this all the time. I'm suffering. What am I doing wrong? Yeah, maybe I've said enough about that. That you were born. According to the Buddha, what you did wrong is being born. So now you have it. Now you're born. Now you're suffering. You're not doing anything wrong. There is a question that the Buddha is inviting us to ask, which is, how do I tend to this suffering that I have right now? That's a totally different question. And maybe studying the causes of my suffering will be helpful for how I tend. But the question is, how do I tend? How do I care for? How do I meet this suffering that I have now? So first we embrace and accept and fully meet our suffering, our problem. We don't shrink and blame ourselves for having the problem in the first place. So the spirit of repetition is necessary. If you do not have this kind of spirit, or if your everyday life is not based on this kind of spirit to repeat it forever, you cannot cope with the problems you will have day after day. So somehow, if I can appreciate or realize this constancy, this repetition, then it will be easier to cope. Our practice with a problem is not a one-time thing, it's ongoing. And that our idea that it's a one-time thing is intimately related to the trouble we have coping. So I was exploring this in myself and aware of this feeling like kind of complaint that, give me a break, you know. I just had a problem. I just had to welcome, I just had to welcome some difficulty. I just had to practice generosity and ethical discipline and patience and energy and concentration and wisdom. I just had to practice this with a problem. Ugh, stop. How, it's not fair that I have to do it again. I just did it. So that's this feeling of lacking the spirit of repetition. And it makes it very hard to cope because every problem we're like, oh my God, this again. I have to be kind and generous and welcome and wise again. What a drag. I just did that. But if we have the spirit of, I am up for this over and over, I want to do this forever, because what could be better than this practice of welcoming, this cultivation of wisdom and compassion? So one of the things that I've noticed, in part because people like my wife have pointed it out to me, is that I tend to feel put upon. Maybe you know that feeling, put upon. It's like, how could you even ask reality, me to have this problem? Not just the problem that I have the problem, it's that I shouldn't have to deal with this. So that's exhausting. The problems are exhausting, but even more exhausting and more actionable in a way is this attitude I have of, I shouldn't have to deal with this problem. lack the spirit of just joyfully meeting, joyfully continuing forever. And then, of course, when I'm complaining about the fact that there's a problem, I don't even think this thing should be happening. And nobody even could expect me to be taking care of this. It's unreasonable, the problem that I have now. No reasonable person could expect me to have to deal with this problem. So it's very easy to be half-hearted then about my care. Nobody would fault me for being half-hearted with this problem because so mostly in me, this attitude is connected to this feeling of, well, the problems just get out of the way so that I can be fully alive. Well, the problems get out of the way so I can realize this actual fact of my life. So I've noticed, I want to share this idea that self-pity and self-compassion are not exactly the same thing. And maybe the put upon feeling is a little bit the self-pity kind of feeling. I have a problem that I shouldn't have to have. The compassion with that same difficulty sounds more like I am suffering and I'm right here for my suffering. I'm listening to my suffering and caring for it, meeting it, and I'm frustrated that I'm suffering. I'm sad and tired and frustrated to be suffering again. And I'm here for that. I'm open to that. I'm welcoming that, listening to that. That's compassion. It's different than just complaining about my suffering. So I was remembering this morning about a time I was walking up the garden here at Green Gulch from a visit to my teacher who lived in Muir Beach at the time. And I had this kind of body resonant idea that Buddhism means stop complaining. This was a teaching for myself. This is not a teaching for someone else. This is me walking in the garden, realizing to be a sincere and serious practitioner, the Buddha way is inviting me to stop complaining about reality, my life. So that really resonated in me as an intention or as some wisdom. And it has this idea of Buddhism is about not complaining. It's about being compassionate rather than complaining. That has a near, what we call a near enemy, a pernicious, unwholesome, unhelpful neighbor that sometimes masquerades, as this virtue. So I wanted to explore that a little bit. And the image that came up to explore that through is a sign I saw at the tire shop in San Rafael. Maybe some of you know the tire shop. It just changed owners recently. Very different feeling in there. So there was a sign on the table at the tire shop that said, "No whining." Or maybe it said whining and then it had a red, with a slash through it. And it was an awful thing to have on the table at the tire place. What does that mean? Who is that for? And what does that mean? Who's deploying that? Who put that there and why? What are they protecting? So it sounds like cutting off, denying something. It's a kind of silencing, letting people know that they shouldn't expect to be heard. Don't expect to be heard here. Just shut up, actually. So it seemed really quite toxic and probably sexist, when you think about who is most accused of whining. So if the boss puts no whining on the table, I think he's being defensive. He wants to insulate himself from feedback, and he's not calling his beloved employees and customers into their deeper, more spacious self, saying, can you make room to welcome this without being caught by your suffering? It was more like, I don't want to hear about it. So that's the near enemy of don't complain, is I don't want to hear about it, get over it, stop it. Compassion is, there is room, this is welcome. I'm not complaining that this problem is arising. I am welcoming this problem as my life, as the only life I have, the only time I have to appreciate my life. So I don't think this sign is without its wisdom. I just think it's not stated correctly. So I was imagining some other signs that we could print out and take and suggest that they switch. For example, welcome. Welcome. We know this might be a difficult day for you, given your car's perhaps unexpected tire issues. Please consider touching your most spacious and compassionate self and make room for your suffering without being caught by it, for the benefit of yourself and all suffering beings. You have our support in this deep and difficult practice. So it's kind of a lot of words for the sign, but I'm actually kind of glad that they've closed now, because I would feel, now having said it, I would feel like I would sort of have to try that and see what they said, but I'm off the hook on that. I think it's maybe the same message, or that speaks to the wisdom of this message. We don't want to be caught. We want to have room for our suffering. We want to not just react and complain that our life is how it is. And it's hard when the tire has problems, especially when there's another problem. I need the tire because the kid, there's already a problem. And then there's this other problem. Of course I'm going to whine that it's 2 hours and I don't have an appointment. So another more concise sign I thought was, notice Shanti Paramita is practiced here. Here we practice the paramita of patience, of spaciousness, of tolerance. So Shanti Paramita is our virtue or practice of sometimes called forbearance or endurance, kind of hard words. Spaciousness, allowing, welcoming, having room for difficulty. One of the 6 paramitas, or core virtues of Mahayana Buddhism. So bodhisattvas, those who are committed to living for a more healed and at peace and at ease world, have this vow to practice this kind of tolerance or patience or spaciousness. A classical image of it is of salt and water. Many of you also have heard this image. Thich Nhat Hanh shares it from the teachings of the Buddha, that if you have a cup of salt and you pour the cup of salt into a bowl of water, the water won't nourish anything. You can't drink it and you can't offer it to anyone. But if you take that same cup of salt and put it in a wide river, then you and beings can still be nourished by the water of that river. But that, I think, really captures the spirit and the feeling of Kshanti Paramita, of spaciousness with difficulty. So our usual habitual response to suffering is to try to like reduce the amount of salt that's coming into the bowl. And Shantiparamita is suggesting that there's another variable here, which is how much water. So the practice, of course, whenever we can reduce the amount of suffering flowing in, anything we can do to minimize this tide of problems coming at us, please do it. And probably there are things we can and should do, but we hit the limit and the salt will keep coming in. So then we get very frustrated because we think that's the only variable. But this image allows us to see that also we can become more spacious. We can practice and cultivate being a little bit of a wider, I don't know, if not river, at least a somewhat larger bowl for the salt to be poured into. So when I'm complaining internally, my feeling is that I don't have an intention of rejecting that. I have an intention of just including more and more. For me, when I'm complaining, it's like, okay, you're receiving something, but then you got a little stuck. You included something and then I got stuck including, and I sort of stopped including, said enough already. So this intention I have of including more and more. So it's not rejecting anything, not rejecting complaining or resistance. It's including. Include that I have the problem, include that I'm frustrated and feel I shouldn't have the problem. Include my breath, include my body, include the sound and the light, sensation. And as I include more and more, I notice that there's also some appreciation for the opportunity of this problem in the cultivation of wisdom and compassion and welcoming. Complaining was a part, but if I keep including, there's whole other oceans of ways that it is right now. I want to close with one more example, one more teaching of this from Suzuki Roshi. He expresses this same spirit of continuing forever through his discussion of our bodhisattva vow, these endless, infinite, amazing vows that bodhisattvas take. He says, sentient beings are numberless. I vow to save them. That's our first of the 4 vows of a bodhisattva. He says, since the sentient beings are numberless, we will take this vow numberless times, that's all. In this way, our feeling has quite a different quality. We feel the eternal practice of our Buddhist way. Sentient beings are numberless means that our practice will continue forever. So beings are numberless. Is overwhelming. I vow to save them is overwhelming. But he says if they weren't numberless, then we would have to stop practicing. As soon as we ran out of beings, we wouldn't get to practice anymore. So what good fortune that the beings are numberless, so we get to practice forever. That's this turn, if we're thinking about the outcome, the end, then we're very discouraged. I'm looking for the end of my problems, and so I'm discouraged that the problems keep coming. Because of course my peace and well-being and awakening is at the end of my problems. So I'm concerned about the end and I hear all beings, I vow to save them, and I'm discouraged because I don't see that outcome anytime soon. But if I'm concerned about the process, as we are in Zen, it's about the practice, not the enlightenment. It's about the process, not the end. Then this infinite thing just becomes this infinite opportunity to practice, which is the part that we wanted. Was never about the end. So what fortune that there's endless beings to save, and of course, likewise, endless delusions. It says, desires or delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. If the purpose of this vow is to give rise to our Buddha mind, then it makes sense. Inexhaustible gives us some encouragement that we can continue our practice forever. So each delusion, thank you, kitchen crew, for taking on the problem of feeding us. I'm almost finished. If my talking is a problem for you, please know it will end soon. And then it'll be great, you know? Then your legs will be more comfortable. What will that be like? I also am looking forward to that. But I wonder what will be so great about that? Yes, I'll be a little more comfortable, but if people won't be looking at me. But will I be any more alive? Will I have wasted this last few minutes of perfectly beautiful day? Not knowing for sure how many more minutes I have. How about just welcome problem. This is my life. The fact of my life. Oh, Suzuki Roshi said, as I said last time, we're so concerned with our problem. We're more concerned with our problem than with the fact that we're alive. Wonderful teaching. But the problem is the same as the fact that we're alive. So we have no idea what to do about our problem. Zen has nothing to tell you about what to do about your problem. But we have a path and a practice of welcoming and meeting and including each and everything as it comes. Thank you for taking on this practice. I hope that by being here, you're expressing that you are up for practicing in this way forever. And I wish and offer that any good that comes of our practicing in this way and of our practice this morning be of benefit to suffering beings. So we dedicate the merit of our time this morning, the great effort to arrive at and sit through this talk. Any merit of that is offered to the well-being of sentient beings everywhere. Thank you very much for your kind attention. And I think the way we're doing things now, there's a few minutes for questions.
There's a microphone available if you have a question. Jiryu, would you pick the questioners?
Anybody have a comment or question? Or we could move on to the next problem. They just keep coming. Right? Yeah. It's almost like, why hurry to solve this problem? And the next one is just right there. Linda, please. Thank you for being here. Good morning.
While you were talking, I had this last part that you were speaking about. I had a kind of image of the phrase, before the donkeys leave, the horses
Yes.
arrive. It just seemed
Thank
like
you.
practicing in this way with all the donkeys, with all the
Yep.
problems, these
Yes.
beautiful horses come galloping
Mhm.
in of the practice. So
Thank
thank
you.
you for
Right.
going so deeply into Suzuki Roshi's words and your life.
Thank you, Linda. Yeah, maybe that's not quite, maybe we need to revise that image, that metaphor. The way I've heard it is, before the donkeys leave, the horses arrive. But that kind of, you hold out some hope that the donkeys are going to leave, you know? That's not really the Buddha way. That's like, you will have a life that won't have suffering, which is not the Buddha's teaching. So it's more like, horses only arrive where there's donkeys. There's no other way to have a horse. So it kind of falls apart, I guess. The other way that touches that, this in the end, maybe the epilogue of Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, when he says, before the rain stops, you can hear the birds sing. That, I love that line. It was actually written on my first rakusu. Before the rain stops, you can hear the birds sing. I think my teacher knew I was really waiting for the rain to end so I could hear the birds. Before the rain stops, you can hear the birds sing. Thank you, Linda. In the front.
Could you talk a little bit about the kind of bearing these moments of suffering
Yeah.
and how it widens and offers? I guess I'm a little confused about. I get the bearing of it,
Yeah.
but the wideness and compassion.
Yeah.
If you could talk a little, that would help me. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm not sure, what words reach. It just feels very natural to me that my body and mind and heart, wanting to protect itself, wants to close down to the suffering, wants to hold the suffering at arm's length. It feels very understandable. And I have kind of a warm feeling for that impulse. Like, yeah, you don't want to suffer. Of course, you're trying to like pretend that didn't happen or pretend you don't feel how you feel, or to like make it okay. And Buddha said, it's okay, it's fine. I'm not whining. It's feeling, feeling in my body. So in our sitting practice, we just feel in the body, like, I think I'm holding, there's something I'm not letting in. So it's just however we encourage ourselves to feel, it's actually okay. There is room. And this, in Zazen, again, it's maybe the donkey and the horse is sort of like, someday I'm going to sit Zazen without pain. I've maybe gotten over that idea too. I don't know that there has ever been a moment of Zazen without pain. Maybe some people have had them. So even just in any little way that we can open to something that our first reaction or impulse is to push away and kind of tighten against and withdraw from, anytime we can just let that in, so to just let in, open to, welcome to the pain in my shoulders. And then it's like, okay, there's room. Every time I do that, I feel like there's a little more room. It actually was okay. It was worth trying to keep it out. So I guess it's maybe more like noticing, not so much working on the opening, so much as working on noticing the closedness and trying to soften there wherever I can. And then really appreciating when I do. So even if it's just in a very small way, I allowed something, I welcomed some problem to be really happy for yourself. I'm really happy that this practice is taking place, and to feel like, wow, that really was okay. I didn't think it would be okay, part of me didn't think it would be okay to allow this in. And now I've allowed this in and it's kind of okay. Maybe this kind of thing will work in some other circumstance too. Maybe this is a practice I could trust and rely on of opening. So part of it is our faith that opening will hold us. I can't let go. It's too complicated. I need to be holding on in order to get through, in order to cope. So part of it is just this faith, which we nourish. We water the seeds of this faith by appreciating every time it works to open a little bit and that we're held, that it's okay. So maybe what I'll offer for now. Thank you for wanting to practice that. Maybe 2 more questions.
Thank you, Jiryu.
Welcome.
I've been carrying a mild burden since before Zazen this morning, and during your Jundo, when you walked by, I did not put my hands in Gasho. I was inattentive, thinking about the very big bell back there.
Mm.
And I appreciate you reminding me to welcome it and appreciate letting it go right now and welcoming my next problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. The Zen forms are just such a problem. I mean, this thing is just, the whole thing is such a problem. Why do we have this problem? Why? Isn't our life hard enough? Why have all these rules about how we come into the but then we can see our mind. And thank you for letting that go. Taking up the forms means being up for just failing at observing the forms all the time.
Thank you. That was wonderful. I get the room that acceptance of your problem creates. Is there not a purpose other than the room just being there?
I'm not sure I understand. A purpose, we have a problem, and then we make room for it and welcome it.
Yeah, and in that welcome, we, I guess, feel better or more accepting, or it's not as painful, and that creates a different environment.
Yes.
Is that different environment meant to invite something else?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So an appropriate response to the problem. So this is a way of caring for the problem. So when I'm not really welcoming the problem, it's hard to care for it. But it's not, yeah, thank you very much. Not just about then having space and these problems and like, whoa, it's all included, I'm fine. There's like space and problems. I mean, that's maybe okay, but the more actual embodied feeling of it is there's welcoming this problem. So when I say include, this really is my practice and intention, is to just fully share in the feeling of the problem, share in the feeling of the situation, include everything, and connect with everything with a clear and empty mind, hopefully. And then let the appropriate response is critical. That's the bodhisattva activity, is that then some response comes up, but it's a response that's connected to what's happening. Does that make sense? So we say just harmonize with everything or accord. So anytime you come in, anything happens, the first step is, or the first, phase or the basis is to allow and welcome and, sort of become one with, if you can tolerate that expression, just merge with, join with, appreciate exactly what's happening and totally allow it and welcome it. And then we respond based on that without a previous idea. That's kind of Zen activity. Is there's no preconception, there's no plan, there's no strategy. There is emptying the mind, merging with the situation, harmonizing with it, according with it, and then letting something that nobody would have guessed come from that lived connection rather than from something I know what to do about this situation. I say this, but actually meeting, not knowing what I'm going to say to my friend and their problem or my problem, but just meeting there, being there, and having that faith and tolerance to have the empty mind and trusting that a response will come from that meeting. So that it's so that we can better meet and heal all of these problems and cultivate all of the virtues in the process. So yeah, the problem is totally life-giving. It's what allowing us to do all of the practices that we intend and vow to do. Just the first step is making room and having the spirit of again and again, problem after problem. I will keep making room for this opportunity. Is there one more important question, or can we let it go for this morning?
Do you want one from online?
Sure, maybe one more. Thank you, Ray.
Thank you. The first question that came through from Sandeep, who is zooming in from Ohlone land, said, "Thank you for sharing the quote from Suzuki Roshi about how we are focusing on the problem and not the gift of life itself. I wonder if it's reinforced by our collective American culture and how we can shift towards one of more inclusivity."
Thank you. Yeah, so that's maybe a little bit of a different topic. This great phrase of Suzuki Roshi is that you're more concerned with your problem than with the fact that you're alive. Which doesn't mean that the fact that you're alive is separate from your problem. It just means what you see now when you have a problem, you see the problem. You don't notice that there's a problem in life, which is amazing, unspeakable, unthinkable, that there's something. And all I see is, yeah, but the thing that there is a problem. Like, whoa, so that for me, that reorienting. But in this teaching, the point is to not imagine, to not look for our actual life anywhere other than right in the problem. And so to me, that is, inclusivity, allowing, welcoming, that each of us doing that in our own practice and doing that together, I do trust has an impact and an effect on our collective capacity to include and include and include. Thank you very much for your time and attention.